A flight attendant threatened to eject a black CEO over dress code, not realizing he was wearing a suit branded with the airline's parent company logo. He threatened to eject the black CEO over a dress code, thinking he had the authority to humiliate him. He didn't realize the man was wearing a suit branded with the airline's own parent company logo. Subscribe if you believe arrogance always falters when faced with undeniable authority. Sir, I'm going to need you to step aside, the flight attendant said sharply, his voice cutting through the soft hum of first-class boarding chatter. Darian Kellier turned slightly, adjusting the strap of his carry-on bag as he took in the sight of the man now blocking his way. The attendant's posture was tense, too rigid to be accidental. His name tag read Roddle Marin. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't welcoming. And his eyes weren't on Darian's face. They were locked on the stitched crest above his suit pocket.
I'm sorry,
Darian asked, calm but firm. His tone dipped in courtesy yet lined with quiet authority. Around them, the cabin had slowed. Passengers still filtering into their seats now lingered in awkward half-pauses, ears tilting toward the unfolding tension. Roddle gestured toward Darian's blazer. That logo. We have a dress code policy for premium cabin passengers, and I believe this particular design may not comply. Darian blinked once. His suit, a tailored navy blue piece trimmed with understated gray, was pressed to perfection. The embroidered crest, a golden swirl surrounding an upward-pointing triangle, rested subtly on the left chest. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't loud. But it wasn't ordinary either. Only a handful of people on the planet knew what it meant. Roddle clearly wasn't one of them. I wasn't aware this airline had a policy against tailored professionalism, Darian replied smoothly, his voice steady, not a hint of offense taken yet. Would you mind pointing out the specific rule? Roddle's face tightened. It's not about professionalism. It's about compliance. That logo might be interpreted as external branding, which isn't permitted under internal policy. A ripple of confusion spread among the nearby passengers. One elderly man looked Darian over with a puzzled expression, clearly seeing nothing out of place. Another younger man muttered to his seatmate, "It's literally just a suit." Darian exhaled slowly, his mind sharpening. This wasn't a simple misunderstanding. Not with the way Roddle had reacted the moment he saw the crest. Not with how he was glancing, again, to the rear of the cabin, as if waiting for someone's approval. There was coordination in this. Not randomness. Not policy. Do you suspect I'm representing a competitor? Darian asked carefully, adjusting the cuff of his sleeve. If so, I can clarify. Roddle didn't answer that. Instead, he straightened. If the passenger is unable to remove the article in question, I may be required to escalate the matter. Darian studied him. The language wasn't natural. It sounded rehearsed, scripted even. I see. Darian offered a polite smile, then walked calmly past Roddle and into seat 1A without being invited. He placed his bag gently beneath the seat in front and sat, legs crossed, posture relaxed, but his mind fully alert. Across the aisle, phones began rising. A woman angled her screen subtly, recording. A man further back was already typing. Roddle turned, flustered but unwilling to admit defeat. Sir, I'm notifying my supervisor. This is a documented violation of our policy. Darian didn't respond. Not yet. He simply reached into his inner coat pocket and withdrew a sleek, matte black tablet, tapping it once to awaken the screen. He wasn't opening documents. He was logging, capturing, building a timeline. For now, his strategy was silence. But it wouldn't last. Footsteps approached from the rear, heavier and slower than Roddle's. Darian didn't turn, but he heard the murmurs around him rise in anticipation. Even the cabin lights seemed to dim with tension, or perhaps it was just the weight of too many eyes watching something unjust try to unfold. Roddle stood like a statue beside him, chest puffed in false authority. The supervisor will be here shortly. I expected as much, Darian murmured without looking up. Roddle hesitated. You should understand, sir, that noncompliance with flight policy can lead to ejection from the aircraft. And you should understand, Darien said, finally lifting his gaze and locking eyes with him. That escalation without cause invites consequences. For the briefest moment, Roddle's composure cracked. There was something in Darien's voice, not just calm, but controlled power. Like a man who knew every card in the deck but hadn't shown any yet. Roddle glanced nervously to the back of the cabin again. Darien caught it. So did at least 3 passengers filming nearby. This wasn't about a dress code. This was a test. Of what or by whom remained unclear. But Darien Kellier had faced pressure before: corporate boardrooms, federal hearings, strategic audits. This was theater compared to those. As he sat back, one hand resting on the armrest, the other still holding the tablet screen down, Darien whispered to himself in a voice only he could hear, measured, razor-sharp, and quietly prophetic. This is not the hill he wants to climb. Corin Vale arrived before Darien could finish a breath, stepping into the aisle with the sharp, decisive stride of a man who had already chosen his verdict. The cabin lights reflected off his polished nameplate as he stopped beside seat 1A, arms stiff at his sides, jaw locked in the shape of certainty. The crest on your suit is unapproved branding, he announced without greeting, his tone cold enough to chill the air around him. His voice carried the weight of accusation, as if Darien had committed an offense far more serious than wearing a perfectly tailored Navy suit. Before Darien could speak, Corin leaned forward slightly, his expression tightening. It violates our uniform restrictions for premium seating, he added, as if the claim were established truth instead of an improvised rule. The words struck Darien with quiet, calculated force. The twist was immediate and sharp. The company crest he had helped authorize, the emblem worn only by the top tier of Valeron Holdings leadership, was now being weaponized against him by someone who had no idea who stood before him. The surrounding passengers stiffened, unsure whether to intervene or remain silent. Their uncertainty drifted through the air like static. Darien kept his voice steady. "Is that so?" he asked, his tone calm but edged with clarity. "Perhaps you can show me the official dress code outlining that restriction." Corin did not flinch. Instead, he folded his arms, adopting a posture meant to assert control. "The document is internal," he replied briskly. "Passengers are not authorized to review it." Darien observed him carefully. The confidence was too rehearsed, too immediate. This wasn't confusion, it was something else. Something planned. Something meant to intimidate. Hidden dramatic irony pressed at the edges of the moment when Corin added, "Our parent company is very strict these days." The irony was almost suffocating. He was lecturing the man responsible for writing many of the very rules he claimed to be enforcing. Darien tapped his watch once, discreet yet deliberate. A faint pulse of blue light ran along the side of the device, signaling the activation of an encrypted audio log. Every syllable, every tone, every misstep would now be recorded. He saw Roddle flinch when the light flashed, as if realizing something had shifted out of their control. The tension deepened when Corin straightened, lowering his voice to a warning. "If you continue refusing to comply, I will have you removed from the aircraft for disruptive attire." The phrasing was strangely formal, as if practiced, and it carried the hint of personal bias rather than any actual policy. Darien's posture remained composed, but inside, he mapped the situation like a strategist tracing a battlefield. Roddle's insecurity showed in his clenched jaw and restless hands. Corin's confidence seemed rooted not in procedure, but in assurance that he would be backed by someone unseen. And the fixation on the crest, the one detail they kept circling, was too deliberate to ignore. Something was wrong. Someone wanted him rattled. A quiet movement near the galley caught his eye. The flight engineer from earlier, slim, pale-eyed, with the name tag Hall of Dorn, passed through the cabin again. He slowed as he neared Darien, giving the slightest nod, followed by a quick, nervous glance toward Corin. It was subtle, but it was enough. Another crack in the performance. Another silent warning. Then Roddle's thin patience snapped. He raised his voice loud enough for half the cabin to hear. "Security can be summoned at any moment," he declared, trying to sound authoritative, though his voice trembled at the edges. "You are escalating this situation." Passengers shifted again, discomfort spreading. Phones lifted, cameras angled. No one knew the truth, not yet, but everyone sensed that the men confronting Darian were standing on unstable ground. Darian inhaled slowly. He evaluated the room, the aisles, the witnesses, the placement of phones already recording, the narrow space between truth and humiliation. His patience thinned, but his clarity sharpened. If they were building a trap around him, he would not step into it blindly. He would turn it inside out. His eyes moved from Roddle to Corin, analyzing the quiet desperation beneath their stiff exteriors. Something was pushing them. Something bigger than a suit, bigger than a crest. And then, softly, almost to himself but just loud enough to be caught by the watch's recording, Darian murmured, "If they insist on this path, I will let them walk straight into the truth." Roddle returned to the front of the cabin with a sheet of paper in hand, his posture unnaturally rigid, as if trying to summon authority through stiffness alone. "This is a formal notice of dress code violation," he declared, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. He held the paper out like a traffic ticket, expecting compliance. But even from a distance, the page looked suspicious. The edges were crisp, the text misaligned slightly, and there was no logo, no letterhead, watermark, or timestamp to prove it had come from any official channel. Just plain printer ink on office paper. A murmur rippled through the aisle. Passengers exchanged glances, some raising their phones again, sensing something was off. Darian didn't move. His eyes scanned the paper briefly, then looked past it toward Roddle's face. "Is the captain aware of this document?" he asked evenly, his voice unshaken. Corin Vale, who had remained just behind Roddle, stepped forward before Roddle could answer. "The captain trusts crew judgment," he said, arms crossed, jaw tense. "No need to disturb him with something we can handle professionally." "Professionalism requires protocol," Darian replied calmly. "I'd like to see the dress code in writing, the official one." Corin didn't flinch. "That's internal documentation, not for passengers." There it was, the first misstep. Denial of policy access was a tell. Darian's mind, always 2 layers deep, logged the moment. He tapped the corner of his smartwatch, initiating a discreet audio recording. The soft chime in his ear confirmed it. Every word from here on would be timestamped, encrypted, and admissible. As Roddle puffed himself up, preparing to speak again, movement drew Darian's eye. Olive Dorn, the engineer from earlier, was walking past on the left. Their eyes met for just a second. Dorn's expression was tight, lips pressed thin, eyes flicking toward Corin. Then, with the subtlety of a seasoned whistleblower, he dropped a folded note into Darian's seat pocket and kept walking without breaking stride. Darian waited. Corin turned slightly to address Roddle. In that window, Darian retrieved the note beneath his thigh, unfolding it quietly under his palm. 5 words. Handwritten. Block letters. "He wants you off today." A stillness settled in his chest. The noise around him faded to a dull hum. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a power-hungry attendant gone rogue. Someone, somewhere, had a reason to remove him from this flight, quietly, without incident. But they had chosen the wrong day and the wrong method. Roddle's voice rose above the chatter. "The man in seat 1A is refusing to comply with airline policy," he announced loudly, turning his head so every nearby phone could hear him. "He has been warned, and continued refusal may result in security intervention." Darian didn't flinch, didn't blink. He kept his hands folded neatly in his lap and his back straight. The camera phones around him would capture every inch of his composure. "Let them. If you're confident in your policy," he said smoothly, "you won't mind me requesting to speak with the captain directly." Corin stepped in immediately, this time physically blocking the narrow aisle. His frame was wider than necessary, his shoes planted like bricks. "That's not an option," he snapped. "You've already escalated this enough." The cabin tensed. Several passengers looked on in disbelief. A few muttered in protest. And then, "I saw everything," a voice rang out from across the aisle. A young man in a gray hoodie stood up, hands shaking but voice steady. "He didn't do anything. That suit? It's clean, formal, there's no rule being broken. You're making this up. Roddle turned sharply. Sit down. This doesn't concern you. I'm a paying passenger. I think watching someone get bullied concerns all of us, the man replied. His voice cracked slightly, but his spine didn't. The moment stretched. Darian registered it all, the shifting momentum, the energy of the passengers, the way Corin's mouth tightened as he lost control of the narrative. Still, Darian didn't move, because it wasn't time yet. He scanned the positions of each person, the overhead cameras, the proximity to the exit. The variables had changed. This was no longer just a matter of personal dignity, it was strategic terrain now, and he would navigate it with precision. He looked Corin in the eyes, slowly, intentionally. Then, in a voice just loud enough to carry to the nearby rows, he said, "Every step you take now has a consequence." Captain Arvin Kellis stepped out of the cockpit with a firm gait and a furrowed brow, his hand brushing over the flight manual tucked under one arm. His presence snapped the attention of the cabin like a taut wire. His gaze locked immediately onto Roddle Marin, the lead flight attendant, who gestured aggressively towards seat 1A. The moment the captain opened his mouth, Roddle took over. "Captain, the gentleman in 1A is refusing to comply with uniform policy. His jacket's got a crest that's confusing passengers and undermining our standards." The words came out with forced urgency, like a man trying to win an argument before it starts. Arvin's eyes flicked toward the seated man, Darian Kellier, whose posture was too composed for someone allegedly causing trouble. The navy blue suit was pristine. The crest, while unfamiliar to most, bore the elegance of authority. The captain studied it for a beat longer than necessary, suspicion tightening around his features. Darian met his eyes but didn't move. His voice was calm, deliberate. "Captain, I'm wearing a suit appropriate for business travel. The crest is tied to professional matters, nothing disruptive." Arvin didn't answer immediately. His instincts, sharpened over years of navigating passenger disputes, told him something was off. But pressure was already building. Passengers were watching. Cameras were raised. And Roddle was visibly agitated, practically vibrating with the need to maintain control. "I'm going to need identification," Arvin said sharply, stepping closer. "I'd prefer to address the matter formally upon landing," Darian replied. "There's been a misunderstanding, but it doesn't warrant escalation." Roddle scoffed beside him. "He's deflecting, Captain. We need to remove him for uniform misconduct before this becomes a bigger issue." The phrase hung in the air. Uniform misconduct, for wearing a suit. The absurdity wasn't lost on the passengers. Murmurs spread like a ripple across the rows, and a few cameras zoomed in. Dramatic irony thickened the moment. The captain, unknowingly threatening the very man who had the authority to suspend him. Arvin's gaze fell again on the crest. Something about it stirred familiarity. His eyes narrowed, lips parting as if to ask a question. But before he could speak, movement to his left pulled his attention. Olive Dorn, the quiet flight engineer, had stepped forward. He didn't say a word at first. His lips twitched with hesitation, his fingers curling and uncurling near his waist. He looked as if he wanted to intervene, but didn't. Something held him back. Darian noticed it. That fear wasn't directed at the captain. It was aimed at someone else in the cabin. Roddle's voice rose again. "Sir, I'm warning you. If you don't remove the jacket, we'll have you escorted off the aircraft." The threat was sharp, loud enough for every seat to hear. The tension was now almost visible, stretching across the cabin like glass about to shatter. Then, without warning, the aircraft gave a light jolt. Just the subtle tremble of will repositioning, but with the current tension, it felt like a sign. A warning. A final moment before something broke. Passengers leaned forward. The cabin, once murmuring, now fell into a focused silence. Darian's hands remained folded in his lap. His voice was firm but measured. "Captain," he said, eyes locked with Arvin's. "If you make a decision based on misinformation, it won't just affect this flight. It will affect careers, reputations, investigations." Arvin flinched slightly, but stood his ground. Roddle took a step forward. "We have protocols. If he won't comply, we proceed." That was when Dorn moved again, but only by half a step. Enough to show conflict, not yet enough to tip the balance. Darien could feel it. The pressure wasn't random. This wasn't about a crest or a policy. It was a setup, and someone in that cabin was terrified of what would happen if the truth came out. Still seated, still calm, he let silence do the work. Then he leaned forward slightly, just enough to shift the captain's attention fully onto him. His voice didn't rise, but his words cut with precision. "Make sure your decision is something you can defend after landing." The aircraft jolted forward as the engines hummed into motion, beginning the slow crawl down the taxiway. But inside the cabin, the real turbulence was just taking off. Roddle Marin stepped into the aisle with a stiffness that felt theatrical now. His voice, firm and loud enough for nearby passengers to hear, cut through the air. "Sir, your refusal to remove your jacket now constitutes a security risk under Section 4.7 of the Crew Discretion Clause." Gasps were muted but real. A ripple of uncomfortable laughter escaped from a man in 2C, followed by a woman in 3A exchanging glances with her husband. The tension had become absurd. Darien Kellier didn't flinch. Still seated in 1A, he looked up at Roddle with calm precision, one eyebrow lifting, not in defiance, but in clinical observation. "A security risk," he echoed, his tone measured, neutral. "Because of a jacket." Roddle's face tightened. His authority was starting to crack, and the cracks showed in the volume of his voice. "This is your last warning," he snapped. "Non-compliance may result in your removal before takeoff." He glanced around, clearly hoping for some supportive nods. But the silence that met him wasn't solidarity, it was judgment. From the front, Captain Arvin Kellis pushed through the curtain again, clearly agitated. The glint of uncertainty had replaced his earlier confidence. Trying to regain control, he spoke with forced diplomacy. "Let's de-escalate this. Perhaps we could downgrade the passenger to economy seating for the remainder of the flight. That should settle the issue without further disruption." A collective silence fell over the cabin. The offer was not just insulting, it was surreal. The man they were trying to downgrade was the very authority underwriting their entire operation. Dramatic irony condensed like fog in the aisle. Darien's crest, faint but deliberate on his suit, now felt like a glowing contradiction in the faces of those who failed to recognize it. Darien's eyes narrowed just slightly. He hadn't spoken yet. He didn't need to. Every movement around him was revealing far more than words ever could. But as he opened his mouth to respond, another voice cut through the silence like a blade. "He's not just a passenger," Holliv Dorn said from the rear. The flight engineer stepped forward into the aisle, voice clear and unwavering. "That crest belongs to the executive board of Arison Group. He's one of them." Time stopped. Roddle went pale, his mouth slowly closing as the color drained from his cheeks. Corin Vale stiffened, retreating half a step without realizing it. Even the captain seemed to flinch, his eyes darting between Darien and Dorn, as if trying to compute the magnitude of what had just been revealed. But Dorn wasn't finished. His presence now felt like a shield drawn over Darien. "And if any of you had taken 2 minutes to verify your own internal registry, you'd know you've just threatened the man who authored the very oversight process you're violating." Corin recovered first, but not with humility. His pride flared into indignation. "That's false information," he barked, his voice rising. "He's misinformed. He doesn't have clearance to speak on passenger identities." "And yet," Darien finally said, standing slowly and deliberately, "he said nothing I haven't given him the right to say." Corin's face darkened. "You're both trying to interfere with chain of command protocol." Dorn stood his ground, unfazed. "You're trying to bury the chain in lies." The captain held up both hands as if to halt the growing fire, but the cabin air had already shifted. The passengers weren't confused anymore. They were watching. Phones were up. Eyes were locked. Every second was being recorded in silence. Darien turned slightly, facing Roddle again. "You insisted I was violating policy. You threatened removal. You attempted a downgrade. But now that truth has entered the cabin, your tone shifts. Curious. Roddle said nothing. His lips parted, but no words came. And then, like the twist of a screw that had already been stripped, Corrin lashed out. You'll be facing disciplinary action, Dorn, he spat. Internal grievance for breaching procedural hierarchy. Darian's eyes stayed locked on him. But something changed in his expression. Subtle, but unmistakable. The patient restraint began to give way to sharper calculation. That's not incompetence, Darian thought. That's cover. He's protecting something. He didn't say it out loud. Instead, he breathed slowly, aware that the scales had tipped. The incident was no longer about a jacket or a seat or a crest. This wasn't about overreach, it was about concealment. And concealment has fingerprints. Darian's mind clicked into a new mode, no longer reactive but investigative. Whoever had sent Corrin down this path wasn't just trying to embarrass him. They were trying to erase him. Quietly, before takeoff, his eyes met Dorn's. The engineer nodded slightly, just enough for Darian to know he wasn't alone. This was sabotage. And as the cabin remained locked in collective breath, Darian gave one final look toward Corrin, then to Roddle, then to the captain, and thought, if he's covering something, we're past policy now, we're inside sabotage. The plane stopped so abruptly mid-taxi that several passengers glanced up in alarm, as if the floor itself had shifted beneath them. A soft click echoed through the cabin as the engines eased into an idle hum. Before anyone could ask questions, Captain Arvin's voice came over the intercom, tense and edged with something he tried, and failed, to hide. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a temporary delay due to a passenger concern. Please remain seated. The cabin fell into an uneasy stillness. Roddle immediately leaned toward Corrin, whispering sharply, their shoulders tight and their eyes darting in every direction. Whatever confidence they acted with minutes ago was crumbling now. Roddle's hands trembled slightly as he pretended to adjust his tie. Corrin's jaw clenched so hard the muscles twitched along his cheek. Darian remained perfectly still in seat 1A, his posture controlled and precise, as if he understood that any sudden movement would shift the fragile balance in the room. Dorn stood beside him, not speaking, not announcing anything, just choosing his place with a quiet boldness that radiated more authority than Roddle's entire performance. The silence between them held weight. Dorn leaned in slightly, lowering his voice until only Darian could hear him. A manifest tampering report was filed 2 days ago, he murmured, eyes fixed on Roddle. Someone tried to alter crew assignments. My name was on the anonymous witness list. Darian's eyes narrowed, not in panic, but in analytical focus. Every detail locked into place like pieces rotating inside a vault. They thought you'd be here, he whispered back, and the crest made them think I was you. Dorn nodded once, the movement rigid. You were probably supposed to disappear quietly. The words hit like a cold blade drawn slowly across the air. Not shouted, not dramatized, just spoken with grim certainty. Across the cabin, Roddle suddenly raised his voice, trying to regain ground. Passengers cannot impersonate airline executives, he declared, but the strain in his tone made the lie shake. He scanned the audience as if hoping they would agree blindly. They didn't. Murmurs rose like a tide, passengers shifting, recording, whispering that none of this made sense. Corrin shot Roddle a warning look, but it was too late. Whatever narrative they were trying to push was unraveling thread by thread. Darian stood slowly, each movement deliberate. His calmness contrasted so sharply with Roddle's unraveling composure that it only highlighted the desperation of the situation. He reached inside his jacket, and Roddle immediately stepped back as if expecting confrontation. I'm retrieving a document, Darian said, voice steady. He didn't pull out an ID. He didn't show a badge. Instead, he withdrew a folded letter, its edges slightly worn from handling, its seal still intact. He held it between 2 fingers, letting the weight of its significance settle into the air. This, Darian said quietly, is the original signed policy for the Arison Reform Plan. He unfolded the letter with controlled precision and held it where Dorn could see it first. Dorn's breath caught. "That's your signature," he said, eyes widening. His voice was no longer hushed. It carried enough certainty to silence 3 rows around them. The captain approached, hesitant but drawn by the gravity of the moment. He took the letter, scanning the lines, recognizing every mapping code and verification stamp. His face shifted from suspicion to realization. He swallowed hard and looked up at Darien with newfound clarity. Silence rippled outward, thick and heavy, filling every space between the seats. Roddle opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Corin looked away, his posture collapsing like a tent with broken poles. Darien finally stepped forward. No aggression, just quiet authority radiating from every controlled breath. He locked eyes with Roddle, who could no longer hide behind false policies or fabricated forms. "You're not wrong," Darien said, voice low enough to feel like a verdict. "That someone was meant to disappear today. You just chose the wrong man." The captain's voice sliced through the rising chatter like a blade. "Everyone return to your seats. Crew, report to the galley for reassessment. Immediately." The order, sharp and unmistakable, sent a hush across the cabin. Passengers slowly settled back, the air between them charged with tension. Roddle Marin and Corin Vale remained rooted near the aisle, unmoved by the command. Corin's jaw tightened, and a visible sneer rose to his lips. "This entire situation," he said, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear, "is a setup." The accusation hung in the air like a foul odor. Passengers exchanged glances. A few began filming again. Darien Kellier didn't move. He sat perfectly still in seat 1A, hands resting on the armrests, eyes locked onto Corin with a gaze that was neither aggressive nor afraid, just precise. If anything, his stillness was louder than Corin's words. Roddle, slightly behind his superior, looked rattled but stayed silent, as if waiting for someone else to take the fall. His earlier arrogance was melting, replaced by anxious micro-movements, shifting feet, twitching fingers, eyes darting toward the cockpit. Then, Halav Dorn's quiet voice reached Darien's ear from the seat beside him. 3 months ago, during your audit, Corin lost a promotion. I remember. His name was on the reorganization shortlist. He didn't make the cut. The words landed like a quiet thunderclap. Darien didn't respond immediately, but something inside him settled. Confirmation. This was no longer about a fabricated dress code or procedural error. This was personal. This was revenge. He stood. Calmly, deliberately, he rose and turned to face the cabin. With practiced clarity, his voice carried across the space. "My name is Darien Kellier. I serve as Chief Executive Officer and Board Member of Valeron Holdings, parent entity of the Arison Group, which holds majority operational authority over Ariansky and its internal flight oversight systems." A collective gasp rippled through the cabin. Several passengers gasped audibly. Phones rose higher. "You've just witnessed your flight staff threaten to remove me from this aircraft because of the emblem on my suit," he continued. "An emblem that represents the company that signs their checks." Corin's eyes flared wide. He stepped forward, face flushed, and spat. "He's lying. This is staged. He planted that logo to..." But Darien didn't flinch. Instead, Dorn calmly reached into his inner coat pocket and pulled out a laminated maintenance pass. "Captain," Dorn said, stepping forward. "This is the signed authorization document from 2 weeks ago, cleared by Mr. Kellier for system inspection access. That's his signature at the bottom." Captain Arvin Kellis took the card with hesitant fingers, eyes narrowing as he examined it. The tension in his shoulders slowly gave way to stunned realization. "It's real," he murmured. Corin tried again, voice rising with desperation. "It's fake. Anyone could have. But it was over." The captain raised a hand, silencing him. Then he turned to the cockpit intercom, his voice steady but firm. "Flight control, this is Kellis. Lock cabin doors. Stand by for a formal incident report. This flight is on indefinite delay until this situation is escalated to internal oversight." The cabin reacted in murmurs, disbelief, and shifting emotions. Somewhere near row 3, a man whispered, "This is bigger than we thought." Roddle slumped into the wall beside the galley door. His earlier hostility drained into something resembling regret. Corin, still visibly shaking, took one last look at Darien, but there was nothing left to argue. The crew had played the wrong game with the wrong man. Darien, turning slightly toward Dorn, nodded. "Now let's find out who gave the order." He smirked, convinced the CEO would comply, unaware that every stitch on that suit symbolized power he couldn't challenge. If you believe cruelty under a uniform always collapses under truth, hit subscribe now, because justice never misses a detail. The moment the cabin doors creaked open again, every passenger's attention shifted. It wasn't a flight attendant or gate agent stepping in. It was 2 uniformed men, tall, precise in movement, their dark coats bearing a silver emblem unfamiliar to most on board. But not to Darien Kellier. His gaze sharpened. The insignia belonged to Arison's Internal Compliance Bureau. These weren't just investigators. They were the internal affairs watchdogs of the very company he helped govern. The taller of the 2, broad-shouldered with clipped black hair, scanned the cabin and walked with purpose toward seat 1A. His voice was steady, low, but audible. "Mr. Kellier," he said, nodding with respectful authority. "Marin Voss. I've been briefed." Darien didn't flinch. "Then you know I'm not the one who needs explaining." Marin's eyes met his without hesitation. "This wasn't a misunderstanding," he said, producing a tablet with a data screen open to a pre-boarding report. "We intercepted a manual override that flagged your seat number with a level 3 threat tag before the passenger manifest was finalized." A murmur rolled through the first-class cabin like a subtle quake. Passengers craned their necks, whispering to each other. Dorn, still standing nearby, went pale. Darien kept his tone measured. "Threat tag." Marin nodded. "Protocol violation. The kind of alert that only appears when someone manually overrides the security algorithm. And that kind of override only comes from corporate-level clearance." For a moment, the world stilled around Darien. All the bizarre hostility, the fake form, the aggressive tone, the block at the aisle, clicked into place like puzzle pieces finding their shape. This wasn't Roddle. This wasn't just Corin either. Someone higher up, someone with system access, wanted him off this flight before the wheels even left the ground. Roddle was now sitting rigidly on a jump seat by the galley, clearly trying not to make eye contact with anyone. Corin stood with his arms crossed, but his posture betrayed him. Tight jaw, shifting feet, wide eyes. The bluff was collapsing. Marin turned slightly. "Roddle Marin," he said with quiet authority. "Step forward." Roddle obeyed without a word, his shoulders caving under the sudden weight of accountability. Marin gestured to the side, and another officer began escorting him toward the exit. The man didn't resist. He simply went limp with the resignation of someone who knew the illusion was over. Corin, on the other hand, looked ready to bolt. He raised a hand defensively. "This has gone too far. We were told to push him," he snapped, turning toward Marin. "Just enough to get him off the manifest. We didn't know who he was. We thought." "You thought what?" Darien asked, his voice like a blade. "That you could rewrite the rules for a passenger based on a jacket emblem?" Corin's jaw worked like he was chewing on the right words, but none came. The silence from the rest of the cabin became louder than anything spoken. Passengers who had once watched with confusion were now witnessing a reckoning. Marin leaned closer to Darien, lowering his voice. "This override came from an internal data terminal," he said. "We're already tracing the access log, but preliminary indicators point to a location in Virilon." He didn't need to say the name. Darien already had it in his mind. Grayson Morell. A boardroom confrontation 2 weeks ago replayed in Darien's head. Grayson's outrage at the proposed transparency reforms, his veiled warnings about disrupting the hierarchy. Now it was clear, this wasn't fallout. It was a hit job. "Unbelievable," Dorn whispered. "They used the threat tag system as a weapon." Marin gave a small nod. "It's rare." It leaves a fingerprint every time. Whoever did this didn't count on us responding this quickly. Darian exhaled, slow and deliberate. His thoughts shifted, away from anger, away from the sting of betrayal, toward strategy. "You'll pursue the access logs?" he asked. "They're already in transit to the compliance terminal," Marin replied. "But I wanted you to see this with your own eyes. It wasn't random, and it wasn't just them." Passengers sat frozen. The entire cabin had transformed into a silent stage of truth. No more pretenses, no more procedure, just exposure. Corin, still standing behind Marin, now trembling slightly, finally spoke again, voice smaller than before. "We didn't know who he was. We were told he'd be a disruption, that it was safer to get him off quietly." Darian didn't reply. He simply studied the man for a long moment. Corin looked away. The captain remained near the cockpit door, motionless, face grim. He hadn't intervened. He hadn't defended. And that silence spoke volumes. Darian slowly lowered himself back into seat 1A, folding his hands in his lap. The recordings were secure. The crest still visible. The truth now public. Next to him, Dorn leaned slightly closer. "What now?" Darian didn't look up. His tone was calm, exact. "This flight may still take off," he said to Dorn. "But someone else's career won't." The moment the plane's boarding protocol resumed, Darian Kellier remained seated in 1A, his posture controlled, his eyes fixed forward like a commander surveying a battlefield after the smoke cleared. He didn't fidget. He didn't speak. And yet, his presence carried weight, like gravity pulling the entire cabin into a quiet orbit around his restraint. The previous storm of accusations and power shifts still lingered in the recycled air. Passengers were murmuring again, but now in hushed tones of awe, not curiosity. Some recognized the name. Others had only seen the silent unfolding of something monumental and were left drawing conclusions from posture, tone, and what they'd just witnessed. Marin Voss remained near the galley, arms crossed, a quiet bulwark of authority. He stepped forward now, careful not to disrupt the fragile tension. "We'll isolate the override," he said in a low voice meant for Darian's ears only. "Find out exactly who inserted your name into the threat log." His face bore no smugness, only the weight of someone who understood that this wasn't just breach of protocol. It was treason cloaked in clerical disguise. Darian's gaze remained steady as he replied, "I want access to the incident log, internal, raw entries, time-stamped." His voice was measured, not cold, but sharpened with purpose. A man who'd learned that silence, when chosen, is louder than rage. Without hesitation, Dorn approached, a folder already in hand. The quiet engineer now stood as a pivotal figure in the cabin's shifting balance of power. He opened the file, revealing a printed log with access codes, timestamps, and an embedded terminal tag, clearly traceable. His fingers hovered over one particular entry, highlighted in yellow. "This one," he said, his voice almost reverent, "the manual threat tag insertion, originated from an executive access terminal, Virilon branch office." Darian's head turned fractionally. "Mirel's territory," he murmured. The dots connected with brutal elegance. The false dress code, the fabricated form, the resistance to verification. The cascade of deception hadn't begun on the tarmac or the jet bridge. It had been seated long before takeoff, at a desk inside a glass-paneled corner office hundreds of miles away. Marin's brows furrowed. "You think it was personal?" "No," Darian said slowly. "I think it was strategic." The revelation didn't bring relief, it brought focus. His mission had evolved. The scope had expanded. This wasn't about a disrespectful attendant anymore, or even a bitter supervisor nursing an old promotion wound. This was about someone at the top who had the power to manipulate data, flag identities, and weaponize process to eliminate obstacles. Someone who thought Darian Kellier wouldn't notice. Dorn stepped back, silently preparing a secondary report. "I'll file the full incident through the whistleblower protocol," he said without being prompted, his voice firmer now. "I'll name names, cite timestamps, I'll take it through the chain. You'll be protected, Darian assured him, and for the first time, Dorn didn't look over his shoulder when he nodded. The aircraft hummed with renewed momentum. Outside, ground crews gave the signal, and the plane began inching forward. A faint vibration beneath the cabin floor signaled movement. A new beginning. The captain's voice, quieter than before, crackled over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We'll now resume our flight path to Ironvale City. But he didn't stop there. A pause, then a subtle shift in tone. I'd also like to personally acknowledge that any confusion earlier was regrettable. We're grateful for your cooperation. Darian didn't smile. He didn't nod. But the captain's subtext was clear. He knew now. Knew what he had almost done. Knew who had been nearly ejected under false pretenses. And that awareness would ripple through every decision the man made for the rest of his career. As flight attendants returned to normal duties, passengers glanced discreetly toward Darian. One man, seated across the aisle, gave a slight nod, not seeking acknowledgement, just offering it. Respect had replaced curiosity. Not because of a title, but because Darian never once raised his voice, even while they tried to erase him. Dorn sat in the jump seat nearest the cockpit, organizing his paperwork. Marin stepped back into the aisle, already pulling up the internal communications archive on a secure tablet. Darian finally leaned back in seat 1A, his hands folded lightly in his lap. He didn't need to issue a warning. The wheels were already turning, the data already extracted, the evidence already mounting. Now only one thing remained: to reach the boardroom, not with accusation, but with proof. Not for vengeance, but for architecture. So no other man, in any other seat, wearing any other emblem, would face erasure at 30,000 feet. The captain passed by once more, quietly, respectfully. He paused beside Darian's seat. "Do you still wish to continue the flight, sir?" Darian turned his face toward the window, Ironvale just a few hours ahead. Then, without shifting his expression, he replied word for word, "Now more than ever, I need to reach that boardroom." The wheels struck the tarmac with a muted roar, and the cabin erupted in half-hearted applause, more relief than celebration. Darian Kellier remained still in seat 1A, his hands folded neatly in his lap, his expression unreadable. The tension of the flight still clung to the cabin walls like smoke after a blaze. He didn't stand until the fasten seatbelt sign chimed off. When he did, it wasn't with the stride of a passenger. It was the controlled precision of a man who knew every eye was watching. Flanked on either side by Marin Voss and Hull of Dorn, Darian exited the aircraft through the forward jet bridge, bypassing the usual arrival lanes. They were led through a side corridor toward the private arrivals terminal of Ironvale International. The carpet was gray, the lights clinical. No greeting teams, just silence and controlled steps. At the far end, beneath a chrome Arison Holdings logo etched into the wall, stood Joran Kale, Chief Compliance Officer. His phone buzzed so incessantly it barely left his palm. "It's already spreading," Joran said, his voice low, almost hollow. He held up his screen. The headline was bold and impossible to ignore. Black executive targeted over airline suit, war company's own crest. Darian looked at it without blinking. The quiet in the room felt louder than the flight's chaos had. Each man understood the weight of what had just unfolded, but Darian understood it differently. For the passengers, it had been a confrontation. For him, it had been a carefully disguised ambush. And somehow, he had walked through it without lifting a single weapon. Inside the vehicle waiting for them, the cabin dimmed as doors shut and the engine hummed. Dorn finally exhaled as if the last 2 hours had been one long held breath. Corin tried to wipe his own disciplinary file from the system 2 weeks ago, he said. But it failed. The audit trail flagged it for review. Joran leaned forward. IT traced the wipe attempt, logged it, secured it, everything we need for internal review. Darian turned slightly in his seat, watching the city pass through the tinted glass. The document Roddle used? Already collected, Joran replied. Forensics is matching metadata now. Initial trace points to a desktop inside the Virilon HQ branch. Dorn nodded, adding, "Same office assigned to Grayson Morell." That name drew the slightest reaction from Darien. A flicker at the corner of his eye. The boardroom argument from 2 weeks ago resurfaced, the tension, the warning, the resistance to reform. "It wasn't just negligence," Darien murmured. "Someone wanted it to happen. Someone counted on it." Joran scrolled through his messages. "Board meeting is still greenlit. They've been told it concerns internal exposure." Darien's jaw tightened. "Good. Let them think I'm coming to explain what happened." Dorn raised an eyebrow. "Aren't you?" Darien turned, his voice low and deliberate. "I'm coming to show them what could have happened if I hadn't stayed calm. If I didn't have that crest. If it had been someone without a platform." The vehicle turned sharply, the road ahead narrowing as they approached Arison headquarters. A gleaming tower of mirrored glass and steel. Security cleared them without pause. The car slowed beneath the overhang of the executive wing. Darien took one final glance at the city skyline before stepping out. His coat adjusted itself naturally with his movement, the navy blue fabric once questioned now catching the lobby light like armor. Joran fell into step beside him, his voice hushed. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" Darien didn't hesitate. "I've never been readier." As they moved toward the elevators, the hum of anticipation settled into every footfall. The boardroom waited. The files were ready. So were the facts. The headlines outside were only a spark. The blaze was about to begin inside the room of suits who thought silence could still outpace truth. Dorn walked just behind them, glancing down at his own credentials, now tucked inside a folder bearing his new title, Director of Integrity Oversight. Still felt strange in his hand. Heavy. Earned. The elevator doors opened. None of them spoke as they ascended. And as the numbers blinked upward, Darien finally muttered, eyes forward, voice steady as steel. "Let's see what the board has to say when they realize I was the test case." The boardroom was already tense when Darien stepped through the polished double doors. His gait steady, his expression unreadable. The 12 men inside turned in unison, some out of obligation, others out of growing dread. At the far end of the room, beneath the silver crest of Arison Group, the very symbol that had nearly cost him his dignity, sat the long oval table, its surface a battlefield of polished glass and fragile reputations. Grayson Morell lingered near the coffee bar, stirring a cup of tea with forced ease, the kind that breaks under scrutiny. He didn't look up. Darien didn't speak at first. He walked to the center of the room, opened his briefcase, and placed 4 items directly in front of the chairman without saying a word. A fabricated violation form, the annotated flight log, a signed witness statement from Hall of Dorn, and the printout of the system override code used to flag his seat as a security risk. Each document landed like a drumbeat of authority, breaking the silence with deliberate weight. Then came the audio. He tapped his device and the recording filled the space. Roddle's voice, raised and righteous, accusing him of violating a dress code that didn't exist. Corin's firm denial of Darien's identity. Dorn's measured confession about being warned not to speak. The audio clipped and compressed each voice into stark confession. Unfiltered, uncoached, undeniable. Some board members leaned back, their faces pale. Others frowned, scribbling furiously into their notepads, as if they could soften the reality by documenting it. Grayson's stirring stopped. His hand rested awkwardly near the cup, frozen mid-motion, eyes still downcast. Darien finally broke the silence. "I was nearly removed from an aircraft for wearing this," he said, lightly tapping the Arison crest on his lapel. "Not by accident, not by policy, but by a series of deliberate actions guided by a system that allowed it." Grayson looked up, attempting a casual scoff. "We're all being dramatic now, aren't we? Misunderstandings happen." Joran Kale, Chief Compliance Officer, stood from his seat and slid a sealed folder down the table toward Darien. "Not this one," he said. "These are VPN access logs. Your login, Grayson, timestamped exactly 2 hours before the override was activated on Darien's seat assignment. Virilon Terminal. Executive credentials." Grayson's expression cracked. "That's absurd." he snapped, voice suddenly sharp. Anyone could have spoofed that. It's not, look, maybe it was a test run, some internal security simulation. No simulation flags the CEO as a risk while he's en route to approve a reform vote. Joran cut in coldly. You submitted the override. The system recorded the biometric handshake. The room froze. Darian didn't need to shout. His tone was calm, exact. I'm not here to request an apology. I'm here to propose a policy that ensures this never happens again, to me or to anyone else, regardless of their rank. He turned to the projection screen. A simple slide appeared, displaying the proposed amendment, Passenger Removal Protocol Revision. No executive or passenger may be flagged, recategorized, or removed from any Arison-affiliated transport based on non-security metrics without a transparent dual-signature authorization process involving both compliance and operations departments. No one spoke against it. The chairman nodded solemnly. All in favor? 11 hands raised, including his own. Grayson stood motionless, eyes darting from face to face like a man drowning in a pool he built himself. 2 internal ethics officers entered the room, their black folders tucked beneath their arms, and one of them gestured quietly toward the door. You're making a mistake, Grayson muttered. This isn't justice, it's politics. No, Darian replied, still seated. This is structure. Grayson didn't resist. He left with his pride folded tighter than his tie, the door clicking shut behind him with more finality than any gavel. The room emptied slowly after that, men whispering to one another, avoiding Darian's gaze, unsure whether to congratulate or fear him. Joran remained behind, hands in his pockets, his stance relaxed but observant. Do you feel vindicated? He asked, voice low. Darian reached up, adjusted his jacket slowly as if resetting his armor. Not yet, but this was the first gate. 3 days later, the press conference room buzzed with the quiet murmurs of reporters, technicians, and legal observers. The air carried a mixture of tension and curiosity. Something important was about to unfold, and everyone knew it. Cameras pivoted toward the main podium as the side door opened with a firm click. Darian Kellier entered, not with fanfare, but with precision. The navy blue suit he wore, the same one that nearly cost him his dignity, stood out sharply beneath the cool white lights. The Arison crest on his chest shimmered, but no longer with ambiguity. Today it was not misunderstood, ridiculed, or challenged. It was reclaimed. Beside him walked 2 men, Joran Kale, Arison's chief compliance officer, face stone-set and eyes scanning the crowd with cautious alertness, and Olive Dorn, freshly appointed integrity director, whose presence marked a subtle yet seismic shift within the company's internal culture. Each step they took toward the podium felt deliberate, as if crossing a finish line drawn midair. No one spoke as Darian adjusted the mic. A screen behind him came alive, streaming live feeds from airport terminals across the country. Each monitor displayed one policy being quietly implemented. A digital tag reading removal justification required, a crew alert system flashing strike 2, oversight alert, a new login tab marked whistleblower channel, protected node. Small things with massive weight. He scanned the room, not to impress, but to acknowledge. I won't speak long, he said, his voice even not raised. But I will speak clearly. The reporters leaned forward. Pens clicked. Recorders blinked red. I was almost removed from a flight, Darian continued. Not for misconduct, not for danger, but for a suit bearing this emblem. He touched the crest gently, the same way one might touch a scar that had healed, but still held memory. A suit tied to the very institution responsible for funding that aircraft's operation. A man was about to be ejected by the system he helped create, for no reason except fear, confusion, or something worse. Joran stood silently beside him, hands folded. Dorn's gaze didn't move from the center of the crowd, searching, perhaps, for the ghosts who might still be watching. Darian didn't name Roddle. He didn't speak of Corrin's rage or the captain's silence. He didn't need to. Behind him, a new name glowed across the screen. AIC Protocol Launch, aviation integrity and compliance. These are not just policies, he continued. They are safeguards. Starting today, no passenger may be removed from any Airline-operated aircraft without formal written justification filed and logged. A 3-strike overreach alert will track each crew interaction flagged by passenger testimony or internal irregularity. And effective immediately, a new position within our oversight board has been filled, Director of Whistleblower Integrity. Dorn lifted his eyes for the first time. Some reporters whispered his name. Others took photos, realizing the quiet man behind the captain's galley door now held real institutional power. A pause hung in the air, long and heavy. Then, from the second row, a reporter rose, slight, balding, with a press tag clipped to his blazer. "Is it true," he asked, "that Mr. Dorn tried to report misconduct before the flight, but was blocked by an internal policy?" Joran exchanged a glance with Darian. "It was time." "That's correct," Darian replied. "The gatekeeping clause that blocked his earlier report has been dissolved. Permanently." Gasps broke out. The twist landed like a stone in water, soft at the surface, but with deep ripples. "And what do you say to those who think this was just a one-off?" the reporter pressed. "An isolated case of misunderstanding?" Darian stepped forward, closing the space between himself and the edge of the podium. "It was never about the crest, or the seat, or the paper they tried to show me," he said. "It was about how easily someone with no power could have been erased silently. This system exists to serve the people inside it, not the other way around." Flashes went off. Voices called out. But Darian raised one hand. Not to silence, but to center the message. "We wear this crest not to separate ourselves from the world," he said, his voice calm, clear and deliberate, "but to be more accountable to it." The plane doors sealed with a muted click, and Flight 927 ascended into the thick veil of morning cloud cover. Darian Kellier didn't glance up. His eyes remained on the tray table before him, a plain black sweater draping his frame. No crest, no embroidery, nothing that hinted at power or legacy. His name on the passenger manifest was false. His seat not 1A but 17C, intentionally middle, intentionally forgettable. No one greeted him by title. No glances lingered. And that was precisely the point. He scanned the cabin slowly, observing each movement of the crew. The way the young attendant greeted a late boarding father with calm patience. The careful but firm tone used when a child tried to enter the galley. It was procedural, yes, but laced with something new: consciousness. Not fear of punishment, but the presence of accountability. This was what Darian had fought to create, and now he was here to see if it lived. Midway through the ascent, his phone buzzed softly in his jacket. A secured call routed through an encrypted relay blinked on screen. "Dorn? H." Darian pressed a finger to his earpiece. "Go ahead." "They all passed," Olive Dorn said. His voice was steady, but underneath it carried pride. 10 protocols, cleared at federal compliance as of this morning, including crest immunity. Darian didn't answer immediately. He closed his eyes. Crest immunity, the policy that forbade removal of any Airline-branded personnel from aircraft without executive-level review. It was a policy that, had it existed 2 months ago, would have shielded him from public humiliation, crew abuse, and internal betrayal. But now it existed for others. For everyone. He gave a small nod no one could see. "Good," he said. "You have the team in place for surprise compliance audits?" "First deployment starts next week," Dorn replied. "Valeron City, Orlena Hub, and Braylon. You'll like the new digital review tags. No falsification possible." "Keep it quiet," Darian said. "Until it works." A pause. "Understood." As the call ended, Darian tapped open the soft leather folder in his lap. Inside was a manifest, encrypted, annotated. Not of passengers by name, but by algorithmic risk tags. Individuals who, statistically, would have been flagged under the previous profiling systems. He scanned the seat numbers. 4B, 9D, 14A. He watched them now, an elderly man in a gray cap, a young student with earbuds, a middle-aged black professor correcting papers on a tablet. None of them suspected they were part of his evaluation. None had been targeted, and that meant the system was healing. But he knew better than to assume it was whole. A slow tension unraveled from his chest, the kind that never fully released. The wound hadn't closed, it had adapted, transformed. The boarding gate from 2 months ago still lived in his memory. The fabricated forms, the fake violations, the glances that turned into judgments. But today, not one crew member had questioned him. Not one had hesitated when he asked for a simple cup of coffee. The attendant returned now, a young man, nervous, but professional. "Sir," he said, carefully placing a small cup of dark roast on the lowered tray. "Cream or sugar?" "Just this is fine," Darian replied, his tone soft. The attendant gave a polite nod, then stepped away. "No hesitación, no recognición." Just respectful service. Darian leaned back, his gaze drifting toward the oval window. Clouds parted below them like rippling silk, the sky above vast and untouched. Somewhere far below, policies had shifted, directives had changed, systems had been rewritten. But none of that erased the truth of what happened. It only made it mean something. And as the engines hummed with even rhythm, Darian took a slow sip of the coffee, letting its heat settle. Then he closed his eyes, a faint, thoughtful smile forming, not out of victory, but continuity. A silent promise to every passenger, to every unseen traveler who would never know his name, yet might one day benefit from the system he rebuilt in silence. He whispered to himself with quiet finality, the words not for power, not for pride, but for peace. "I didn't fight to be seen. I fought so no one else would have to be erased." He tried to enforce a rule, and froze as the CEO calmly pointed out the logo, proving he owned the very system trying to eject him. If you believe true authority commands respect instantly, subscribe now because justice always knows its mark. Disclaimer: the story you just watched is fictional. It highlights prejudice, arrogance, and the consequences of judging someone without knowing their true authority. Its purpose is to raise awareness, inspire empathy, and encourage conversations about equality, accountability, and respect for every individual.